The starship Resolute drifted silently through the darkness of space, its hull gleaming under the light of distant stars. Commander Jake stood on the bridge, watching the alien world grow larger on the main screen. This was the center of an empire that controlled 17 star systems. Humanity had come here to make friends, to establish trade, to prove they belonged among the great powers of the galaxy. Jake was a tall man with gray hair at his temples and tired eyes that had seen too much. He had spent 30 years in space, but this mission felt different. They were powerful, ancient, and proud. They had conquered dozens of worlds before humans even learned to make fire. Making peace with them could secure humanity's future for generations. The shuttle ride down to the planet took 2 hours. Jake brought his best officers with him. Lieutenant Maria Santos handled security, a sharp woman who noticed everything. Danny Vega ran communications, a young man with quick hands and a quicker mind. Dr. Lisa Park came as the medical expert, and First Officer stood at Jake's side as always. The capital city spread across the horizon like a massive hive. The buildings rose in strange curved shapes, built from materials that seemed to shift color in the light. Everything looked alien, uncomfortable, wrong somehow. But Jake kept his face calm. Diplomacy required patience. High Overseer Han waited for them at the landing platform. He stood 8 feet tall, his body covered in hard plates like insect armor. His 4 arms folded across his chest, and his compound eyes reflected the sunlight in 1,000 tiny mirrors. When he spoke, his voice buzzed and clicked through a translator device. "Welcome, humans. You honor us with your presence. Tonight we feast." The reception hall was enormous, large enough to hold 1,000 guests. Strange music played from somewhere overhead, and the air smelled of unfamiliar spices. Jake walked beside Han, making small talk about trade routes and resource sharing. Everything seemed to be going well. Then Maria touched his arm. Her face had gone pale. "Commander," she whispered, "look at the servants." Jake turned his eyes toward the edges of the room, where silent figures moved between the guests. They carried trays of food and drinks, their heads bowed, their movements quick and fearful. Most of them were or other alien species Jake didn't recognize. But some of them were human. Not adults, children. Jake felt his heart stop. A boy who couldn't be older than 8 walked past, carrying a tray twice his size. A girl of maybe 10 poured drinks for a group of laughing officials. Their clothes were simple gray fabric, and around each of their necks sat a metal collar that blinked with small red lights. "Maria," Jake said, his voice barely under control, "tell me I'm not seeing what I think I'm seeing." "You're seeing it, Commander. Those are human children, and those collars." She didn't need to finish. Jake had seen control collars before, in old history files about the darkest chapters of galactic civilization. They were neural compliance devices, designed to cause unbearable pain if the wearer disobeyed any command. Danny had already pulled out his recording device, hidden in his palm. He moved through the crowd slowly, capturing everything. The children's faces, their collars, the casual way they treated them like furniture. Jake's hands shook. He wanted to grab Han and demand answers. He wanted to call down his ship and start burning this whole rotten city to ash. But he forced himself to breathe. He needed information first. He approached Han with a smile that hurt his face to maintain. "High Overseer, I notice you have human servants. I didn't realize our species had such a long relationship with yours." Han made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Ah, yes, a fortunate acquisition. 3 of your years ago, a small vessel strayed into our space. A colony ship, I believe you call them. The adults were unsuitable for our purposes. Too stubborn, too difficult to train, but the young ones," he gestured with one of his 4 arms. "They learn quickly, they obey well, they make excellent servants." "The adults," Jake said carefully, "what happened to them?" "Disposed of course. They had no value." The word hit Jake like a physical blow. Disposed of. Murdered. Parents, teachers, protectors all killed because they wouldn't bow to these monsters, and their children taken, enslaved, fitted with torture devices, and forced to serve. How many children? Jake asked. 47 suitable specimens survived the processing. They have been distributed among the noble houses as a mark of status. Quite rare, you see. Human servants are considered exotic. Maria's hand moved toward her weapon, caught her wrist and held it tight, shaking her head slightly. Not here, not now. Jake spent the rest of the evening learning everything he could. He smiled and nodded and asked innocent questions while his soul burned with rage. He discovered that the children had been separated, sent to different households across the planet. He learned that the control collars could be activated by any who held authority over the child. He heard stories of punishments given for the smallest mistakes. When they finally returned to the shuttle, no one spoke until the doors closed behind them. "I'm going to kill them," Maria said. Her voice was flat and cold. "I'm going to kill every last one of them." "Get in line," Danny replied. He was still holding his recording device, his fingers white around it. "I got everything, every word, every face." Dr. Lisa Park sat with her head in her hands. "Those collars cause direct neural stimulation. The pain would be, I can't even describe it. And they're using them on children, on Bobbies." Jake stood at the window, watching the alien city fall away beneath them. His reflection stared back at him, and he barely recognized the man he saw. Something had changed inside him during that reception, something that would never change back. "We can't fight them," said quietly. "Not here, not now. They have thousands of ships, billions of soldiers. We have one vessel with 200 crew." "I know," Jake said. "If we try to rescue those children by force, we'll fail, and then things will get even worse for them." "I know," Jake repeated. "So what do we do?" Jake turned to face his crew. These people had followed him across the galaxy. They had trusted him with their lives. Now they looked at him with hope and horror mixed together in their eyes. "Danny," he said, "you're taking a courier ship back to Earth. You're going to show them everything you recorded tonight, everything." "And the rest of us?" Maria asked. "We stay, we smile, we pretend to negotiate." Jake's voice hardened into something sharp and dangerous. "And we plan, because I don't care if it takes a month or a year or 10 years. Those children are coming home, every single one of them." He looked out at the stars, at the vast darkness between worlds. "They think they can enslave our children and face no consequences. They think we're too weak, too scared, too far from home to do anything about it." His hands closed into fists. "They're about to learn how wrong they are." 3 days had passed since the reception, and Jake had not slept. He sat in his quarters aboard the Resolute, staring at the images Danny had captured. 47 faces. 47 human children, the oldest maybe 13, the youngest barely 6 years old. They stared back at him from the screen with eyes that had seen too much pain, too much fear, too much loneliness. A knock came at his door. Dr. Lisa Park entered without waiting for permission. She looked almost as tired as Jake felt. "I finished analyzing the data on those control collars," she said, sitting down across from him. "It's worse than I thought." "Tell me." Lisa pulled up a diagram on her tablet. "The collar interfaces directly with the nervous system through the spine. When activated, it triggers every pain receptor in the body simultaneously. The experience is, there's no word for it, it's beyond torture, and they use them for minor corrections. A child drops a plate, they get shocked. A child speaks without permission, they get shocked. Some of the children I observed showed signs of repeated trauma. Burn marks on their necks from the collar, heating up during extended punishment." Jake closed his eyes. Extended punishment. They torture children for extended periods. "I'm sorry, Commander. I wish I had better news." After Lisa left, Jake called a meeting of his senior officers. They gathered in the conference room, their faces grim. Chief Engineer Carlos had dark circles under his eyes. Maria Santos kept touching her sidearm like she wanted to use it on someone. Sat perfectly still, but her jaw was tight with tension. "We all know why we're here," Jake began. "The question is what we do about it." Carlos spoke first. His voice shook with barely controlled anger. "We go down there and we get those kids. Right now, tonight. I don't care about the odds." "The odds are approximately 10,000 to 1 against us," replied calmly. "We have 200 crew, most of them scientists and technicians. They have a planetary defense grid, ground forces numbering in the millions, and a fleet of warships that could vaporize us before we even reached atmosphere. So we just leave them there." Carlos slammed his fist on the table. "Those are children, human children. Some of them are younger than my daughter back home. I'm not saying we leave them. I'm saying we need to be smart about this." Maria raised her hand. "I've been thinking, what if we go back to Earth, show them what we found and bring back a proper fleet? Enough firepower to actually threaten them." "That could take months," Danny said. "The trip to Earth alone is 6 weeks each way. Then we'd need to convince the government, assemble a fleet, plan an operation." He shook his head. "Those kids have already been slaves for 3 years. How much longer can they hold on?" Jake had been listening silently. Now he spoke. "I've made a decision. Danny, you're leaving tomorrow on the courier ship. You'll take all our evidence and go straight to Earth. Don't stop for anything. Get this in front of the assembly, the military, the press, everyone who will listen." "And the rest of us?" Maria asked. "We stay here. Officially, we continue diplomatic negotiations. Unofficially, we gather intelligence. We find out exactly where every child is being held. We learn the security systems, the guard rotations, the weaknesses in their defenses." Jake's eyes hardened. "When that fleet arrives, we're going to be ready." The meeting ended, but Maria lingered behind. She waited until the others had left before speaking. "Commander, there's something else. Something I didn't want to mention in front of everyone." "Go ahead." Maria pulled out a small device, a communicator modified to look like a data chip. "I managed to plant this on one of the children during the reception. A girl, maybe 12 years old. She seemed different from the others, more aware, less broken." "You made contact?" "Brief contact. Her name is Sophie. She was on that colony ship with her parents. Her father was the captain." Maria's voice softened. "She watched them kill him, Jake. She watched them kill both her parents. And then they put a collar around her neck and sold her to some noble." Jake felt sick. "What did she say?" "She said the children talk to each other when they can. They've been waiting for someone to come. They haven't given up hope, not all of them." Maria met his eyes. "She asked me if we were going to save them. I told her yes. I told her to hold on a little longer." "Can you keep communicating with her?" "It's risky. If they find the device, they'll punish her. Badly." Maria hesitated. "But she's willing to take that risk. She said the other children need something to believe in. She said hope is the only thing keeping some of them alive." Jake stood and walked to the window. The hung in space below them, beautiful and terrible. Somewhere down there, 47 children were suffering, waiting, hopping. "Keep the channel open," he said. "Be careful but stay in contact. Let Sophie know we haven't forgotten them. Let her know we're coming." Over the following weeks, Jake played the diplomat. He sat through endless meetings with officials, discussing trade agreements and territorial boundaries. He smiled when he wanted to scream. He nodded politely when every instinct told him to reach across the table and break someone's neck. But all the while, his crew was working. They mapped the planet's surface, identified the locations where children were being held, studied the routines of guards and servants. They learned that they were arrogant, overconfident. They didn't believe any species would dare challenge them. Their security was designed to prevent slave escapes, not external rescue attempts. Maria's reports from Sophie grew more detailed. The girl had become a leader among the children, passing messages, keeping spirits up, preparing them for the day when rescue would come. She told Maria about a boy named who had stopped speaking after 6 months of abuse, and how she spent hours each night teaching him to hope again. She told her about twins named Grace and Emma, who had been separated and sent to different households, but who still managed to see each other once a month when their owners attended the same social events. Each story added fuel to the fire burning in Jake's heart. One night, alone in his quarters, he wrote a letter. It was addressed to his daughter back on Earth, though he knew he might never be able to send it. There are moments in life when you discover what kind of person you really are, when everything you believe gets tested. I always thought I understood right and wrong, but understanding isn't the same as choosing. Tomorrow, and every day after, I have to choose. I have to choose to keep fighting, even when the fight seems impossible. I have to choose to believe that one ship and 200 people can make a difference against an empire. Most of all, I have to choose to keep my promise to 47 children who are counting on me. He paused, then added one final line. I don't know how this story ends, but I know what I have to do, and I won't stop until it's done. Outside his window, the stars burned cold and bright. Somewhere out there, Danny was racing toward Earth. Somewhere below, Sophie was whispering words of hope to frightened children. And somewhere in Jake's soul, a promise took root that nothing in the universe could break. 6 weeks after Danny left for Earth, Jake made a discovery that changed everything. It happened during a diplomatic dinner, one of many he had endured since arriving in space. He was speaking with a minor official about shipping routes when he noticed someone watching him from across the room. The observer was not. She was an amphibian species Jake had read about but never met. Her skin was smooth and blue-green, her eyes large and dark. She wore simple robes that marked her as a diplomat, and there was something in her expression that Jake recognized. Pain. Old pain carried for a long time. After the dinner, she approached him. Her name was, and she was the ambassador to the Dominion. They walked together through a garden filled with alien plants, speaking in low voices. I saw how you looked at the human children, said. I saw the anger in your eyes. Jake tensed. I don't know what you mean. Please, Commander, I have spent 40 years hiding my true feelings from the. I can recognize someone doing the same. She stopped walking and turned to face him. I had a daughter once. Her name was Myra. She was taken by raiders when she was 9 years old. I never saw her again. I'm sorry. They have been taking our children for centuries. They call it tribute, taxation, the price of peace. We call it what it is, slavery. His voice carried centuries of grief. My government forbids me from speaking of this. They believe peace with thee is more important than justice, but I have never stopped searching for a way to fight back. Jake studied her carefully. Why are you telling me this? Because you are the first species I have ever met who looked at enslaved children and felt rage instead of acceptance. Because your people are new to this galaxy, and you have not yet learned to bow. She stepped closer. And because I believe you are planning something dangerous, and I want to help. Over the next few weeks, introduce Jake to others who shared their cause. There was a warrior from the avian species. His feathers were scarlet and gold, and his eyes burned with old hatred. He had lost his entire family to raiders 15 years ago, all 6 of his hatchlings taken in a single night. He had spent every moment since training and planning and waiting for an opportunity to strike back. There was Grandmother Moss, an elder of the people. She was small and covered in soft gray fur, with gentle eyes that hid a fierce spirit. They had suffered under oppression for over 1,000 years. Generations of their children had disappeared into slavery, and Grandmother Moss had dedicated her life to building a secret network of resistance throughout space. These 3 became Jake's closest allies. They met in hidden places, shared intelligence, and began planning something that none of them could have accomplished alone. Brought detailed maps of slave compounds, gathered over decades of careful observation. She knew where children of every species were held, which facilities had the heaviest security, and which routes were least watched. Contributed technology. They had developed stealth systems that could hide small ships from sensors. He provided plans and components, everything Jake's engineers needed to modify their shuttles for covert operations. Grandmother Moss offered something even more valuable: people. Her network included servants, workers, and low-level officials throughout the empire. They were, and a dozen other species, all united by a shared history of loss. They could pass messages, gather information, and provide support when the time came to act. Meanwhile, Maria continued her secret communications with Sophie. The girl had proven herself remarkable. At only 12 years old, she had become the leader of an underground resistance among the enslaved children. She taught them to appear obedient while secretly preparing for rescue. She organized them into small groups that could communicate across different households. She kept their hope alive with stories of the humans who had promised to save them. One night, Sophie sent a message that made Maria cry. She described a young boy named the one who had stopped speaking. After months of Sophie's patient care, he had finally said his first word in over a year. The word was home. Jake shared Sophie's reports with his new allies. The story of a 12-year-old human girl organizing resistance among slave children inspired them all. The fierce warrior admitted that he had never heard of anything so brave. Grandmother Moss said it reminded her why they were fighting. As the weeks passed, their alliance grew stronger. They developed a plan that combined all their resources. When the human fleet arrived, they would launch a coordinated strike. Stealth technology would allow small teams to infiltrate the slave compounds. Grandmother Moss's network would disable security systems from the inside. Maps would guide them to every child, and Jake's crew would lead the rescue itself. But they all knew the risks. If they failed, they would kill them all. Worse, they would punish the children for the attempted rescue. The control collars could be used to inflict unimaginable suffering. Jake had nightmares about that possibility, about his failure leading to even greater pain for the people he was trying to save. One evening, he sat within her quarters aboard her diplomatic vessel. They shared a drink made from plants, bitter and strong. "Do you ever wonder if we're doing the right thing?" Jake asked. "If we fail, those children will suffer because of us." Considered the question carefully. My daughter Myra would be 52 years old now if she lived. Sometimes I imagine what her life might have been. A family, perhaps, children of her own, a peaceful existence on our. She took a long drink. Then I remember what her life actually was: slavery, pain, and an early death in the service of masters. And I ask myself, could anything we do make that worse? I suppose not. The children are already suffering, Commander. They suffer every day, every hour. The only question is whether we have the courage to try to end that suffering, even knowing we might fail. She met his eyes. I decided 40 years ago that I would rather die trying than live with acceptance. Have you made your decision? Jake didn't need to think about it. I made my decision the moment I saw that first child carrying a serving tray. Smiled, the first real smile Jake had ever seen from her. Then we understand each other. We are not just fighting for those children, Commander. We are fighting for ourselves, for our souls, for the right to look in a mirror without shame. The next morning, Danny's courier ship finally sent word. He had reached Earth. The evidence had been delivered. The Assembly had seen the recordings, heard the testimony, and voted unanimously for action. A fleet was coming. 67 warships under Admiral Ben Torres, along with vessels from 12 other species who had learned what they had done. The galaxy had awakened to the horror of slavery, and it was responding with one voice. Jake gathered his allies and his crew to share the news. For the first time in weeks, he saw hope on their faces. Real hope, not just the desperate kind they had been clinging to. "This is it," he told them. "Everything we've planned, everything we've worked for, it all comes down to this. When that fleet arrives, we hit the harder than they've ever been hit before, and we bring those children home." Maria raised her communicator. "Should I tell Sophie?" Jake nodded. "Tell her help is coming, tell her to be ready, and tell her that we haven't forgotten our promise." Somewhere below, in a grand house owned by a noble, a 12-year-old girl received the message. She read it 3 times, then deleted it and began passing the word to the other children. Rescue was coming. They only had to hold on a little longer. The fleet arrived at the edge of space on a cold morning in November. Jake stood on the bridge of the Resolute and watched 67 warships emerge from faster-than-light travel, their hulls gleaming like stars brought to life. Human ships made up the core of the fleet, but they were joined by vessels from a dozen other species. They had sent their entire battle fleet of 8 destroyers. They contributed 15 fast attack ships. Even the Peaceful had gathered transport vessel to carry freed prisoners to safety. Admiral Ben Torres contacted Jake within minutes of arrival. He was an older man with white hair and a face like carved stone. His voice carried the weight of command. "Commander, we've reviewed your intelligence. Your work here has been exceptional. We know where the children are, we know the security systems, and we know the weak points in their defenses." The Admiral's eyes hardened. "Now we make them pay." The plan was simple in concept, complicated in execution. The main fleet would attack the military shipyards, a target too important to ignore. This would draw their defensive forces away from the planet. While they were distracted, Jake would lead a small strike team directly to the slave compounds. They had 40 minutes to get in, free the children, and get out before reinforcements arrived. 40 minutes to save 47 lives. Jake selected his team personally. Maria Santos would handle security, her skills tested and proven over years of dangerous missions. Carlos came despite his wounded shoulder, refusing to stay behind. Lisa Park insisted on joining to provide medical support for the children. 6 soldiers from the ship's small security detail rounded out the team. Their names were Tommy, Rick Martinez, Amy North, Barnes, Pete, and Cole. Each one knew the risks. Each one volunteered anyway. They boarded the shuttle just before dawn. The stealth systems had hummed quietly, wrapping the small craft in a field that made it nearly invisible to sensors. As they descended toward the planet, Jake watched the battle begin in space above them. They responded exactly as predicted. Their warships raced toward the shipyards, leaving the planet's defense grid weakened. Grandmother Moss's network went to work, disabling security systems and creating confusion in the command structure. By the time Jake's shuttle touched down outside the largest slave compound, they had a clear path inside. The compound was a massive structure of black stone and metal, designed to hold thousands of slaves. Jake's team moved through the outer corridors quickly, guided by maps. They encountered 2 guards in the first hallway and took them down silently. So far, so good. Then the alarms began to wail. "Someone saw us," Maria said, her weapon raised and ready. "We've lost the element of surprise." "Then we do this the hard way," Jake replied. "Move fast, hit hard, don't stop for anything." What followed was the longest 40 minutes of Jake's life. They fought through corridor after corridor, facing guards who refused to retreat. The aliens were tough and well-armed, but Jake's team was fighting for something more important than themselves. They were fighting for children who had spent 3 years in chains. Carlos took a plasma bolt to his shoulder 15 minutes in. The wound was severe, smoking and blackened, but he refused to fall back. He switched his weapon to his other hand and kept shooting. "I'll rest when those kids are safe," he growled. In a narrow corridor leading to the central holding area, they ran into heavy resistance. A dozen soldiers had set up a defensive position, their weapons creating a wall of deadly fire. There was no way around them, and every second of delay brought reinforcements closer. Made a decision. She pushed Jake aside and stepped into the corridor alone, drawing fire away from the team. "Get the children," she shouted. "I'll hold them here." Jake wanted to argue, wanted to drag her back to safety. But there was no time. He led the team through a side passage whilst Weapon roared behind them, counting down the last minutes of their window. They reached the central holding area and found something unexpected. The door was already open, and the children were waiting for them. Sophie stood at the front of the group, her collar still locked around her neck but her eyes bright with fierce determination. Behind her, 46 other children huddled together, scared but ready. Sophie had done what she promised. She had prepared them for this moment. "Commander," she said, her voice steady beyond her years, "we've been expecting you." "How did you get the door open?" Sophie smiled. "We've had 3 years to learn how things work around here. Turns out the guards don't pay much attention to children. They think we're helpless." She held up a small tool, clearly stolen from a maintenance area. They were wrong. Jake felt something break open in his chest, some wall he had built to contain his emotions. Here was a 12-year-old girl who had watched her parents die, spent 3 years in slavery, and still found the strength to lead a resistance. In that moment, he understood what humanity truly meant. "Let's get you all home," he said. The evacuation was chaos. Jake's team surrounded the children, shielding them with their bodies as they fought back toward the shuttle. They had realized what was happening and were throwing everything they had at the escape route. Plasma fire filled the corridors. Screams and shouts echoed off the walls. They lost Tommy at a junction point, hit by 3 bolts at once while covering the children's retreat. Rick Martinez fell moments later, buying time for the youngest children to cross an open area. Amy North went down defending a group of terrified 6-year-olds, her body becoming a shield. Jake stopped counting. He focused on moving forward, on getting the children to safety, on honoring the sacrifices being made all around him. They reached the shuttle with 2 minutes to spare. The children poured inside, Sophie helping the youngest ones find seats and strap in. Maria carried a boy who couldn't walk, his legs injured by years of abuse. Lisa was already treating wounds, her medical kit nearly empty. "Where's Jake?" asked, suddenly realizing his first officer hadn't joined them. Carlos shook his head, his face gray with pain and grief. "She held that corridor until the end, Commander. She gave us time." Jake wanted to go back. Every instinct screamed at him to bring her home. But the shuttle was lifting off, the children were aboard, and staying would mean throwing away everything they had sacrificed for. He stood at the window and watched the compound shrink below them. Somewhere in that building had given her life. Barnes had fallen protecting children he had never met. Pete and Cole had fought until they couldn't fight anymore. Their medic had died trying to save others. 7 crew members, 7 friends, 7 heroes who would never come home. The shuttle broke through the atmosphere and rejoined the fleet. The battle was ending, the forces overwhelmed by the coalition's firepower. But Jake felt no victory, not yet. There was too much grief mixed with the relief. Sophie appeared at his side. She looked out at the stars with eyes that had seen too much darkness and were finally seeing light again. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for keeping your promise." Jake put a hand on her shoulder. "Thank you for not giving up." "The others who died," she hesitated, "will anyone remember them?" Jake thought of Tommy and Rick and Amy and Pete and Ann. He thought of their faces, their voices, their courage. He thought of the children who were alive because those 7 people had chosen to fight. "Everyone will remember them," he said. "I'll make sure of it." The fleet turned toward home, carrying 47 children who had survived the impossible. Behind them, the Empire reeled from a blow it had never expected. Ahead of them, a galaxy waited to learn how a handful of humans and their allies had challenged an ancient power and won. The war wasn't over, but this battle belonged to humanity. And to the 7 who would never be forgotten. The Dominion had ruled 17 star systems for 10,000 years. They had conquered dozens of species, crushed countless rebellions, and built an empire that seemed eternal. In their own minds, They were the supreme power of the galaxy, unmatched and unchallengeable. It took humanity and its allies exactly 3 weeks to prove them wrong. After the rescue of the children, the coalition did not stop. Admiral Ben Torres led the combined fleet in a systematic campaign against military installations. One by one, the Empire's defensive positions fell. They fought back with everything they had, but they were facing something they had never encountered before: unity. Species that had never worked together, that had been divided and conquered for centuries, were now standing shoulder to shoulder against a common enemy. High Overseer Han requested a meeting when his forces had been reduced to a third of their original strength. Jake attended as humanity's representative, standing beside Admiral Torres and ambassadors from a dozen allied species. They met on neutral ground, a space station that had once been a trading post. Han looked different from the arrogant ruler Jake had met months ago. His compound eyes seemed duller, his 4 arms hung loosely at his sides, and his voice had lost its confident buzz. "You have made your point," he said. "What are your terms for peace?" Admiral Torres stepped forward. He was not a man who enjoyed war, but he was a man who understood justice. "First, the immediate release of all enslaved beings in your territory, every species, every individual without exception. That is a significant demand. Slavery has been part of our civilization for 10,000 years. Then it's time for a change." Jake watched Han closely. The alien's body language shifted, showing signs of the internal struggle happening behind those strange eyes. For a moment, Jake almost felt sorry for him. The High Overseer was watching his entire worldview collapse, everything his species believed about their place in the universe being proven wrong. Almost. Then he remembered the control collars, the dead parents, the years of suffering those children had endured. His sympathy vanished. "What else?" Han asked. "Reparations to every species you have harmed, payment to the families of those who died in your service." Tor's voice remained steady. "And the permanent dissolution of your slave trade, not reduced, not reformed, ended. You ask us to abandon our way of life." Jake finally spoke. His voice was quieter than the Admiral's, but it carried a weight that silenced the room. "Your way of life was built on the suffering of children. It was built on families torn apart, on parents murdered in front of their sons and daughters, on control collars that caused unimaginable pain. You ask what we're demanding." He stepped closer to Han, close enough to see his own reflection in those compound eyes. "We're demanding that you become civilized. We're demanding that you join the rest of the galaxy in treating other beings as people, not property. And yes, we're demanding that traditions end." Han stared at him for a long moment. Something passed between them, human and conquered. Finally, the alien lowered his head. "We accept your terms." The treaty was signed 3 days later. Across 17 star systems, slaves walked free for the first time in their lives. Generations of captives emerged from labor camps and noble households, blinking in the light of freedom. The scenes were broadcast across the galaxy. Children reunited with families who had never stopped searching for them. Elders who had spent 50 years in chains finally standing as free beings. Entire species regaining their dignity. The 47 human children returned to Earth as heroes. Crowds gathered to welcome them, faces wet with tears of joy and sorrow. Some of the children found surviving family members waiting for them. Aunts, uncles, grandparents who had mourned them as dead now held them tight and refused to let go. Others, orphaned by this cruelty, were adopted into loving homes within days. The entire planet seemed to open its arms to them. Sophie received special recognition. The girl who had led a resistance at 12 years old, who had kept hope alive when there was every reason to despair, stood before the United Earth Assembly and told her story. She spoke of her parents, of their bravery in trying to protect the other colonists, of their final moments. She spoke of the years of slavery, the pain and fear and loneliness. And she spoke of the day rescue came, of the soldiers who gave their lives to bring them home. When she finished, The assembly offered her a place at Earth's military academy to be taken up when she came of age. She accepted without hesitation. "I want to make sure no other children ever go through what we did," she said. "And I want to be there when they need help, just like Commander was there for us." Jake himself stood before the assembly a week later. He had been offered medals, promotions, a comfortable retirement. He turned them all down. Instead, he asked for permission to speak, and when he received it, he delivered words that would be remembered for generations. "People have called us heroes," he began. "They've said we did something extraordinary, something brave, something worthy of celebration. But I want to tell you the truth. We didn't do anything extraordinary. We did the only thing decent people could do." He looked out at the faces watching him, politicians and generals and ordinary citizens who had gathered to hear him speak. "When we found those children in chains, we had a choice. We could have looked away. We could have told ourselves it wasn't our problem, that we were too weak to help, that fighting back would only make things worse. Many species in this galaxy made that choice for centuries. They accepted cruelty because challenging it seemed impossible." His voice grew stronger. "But some things are simply wrong. Not wrong according to human values or Earth values or any particular culture's values. Wrong universally, wrong obviously, wrong in a way that anyone with a conscience can recognize. The enslavement of children is one of those things. And when you encounter something like that, something that violates every principle of decency, you have an obligation to fight against it. Not because you're certain to win, not because it's safe or easy or convenient, but because failing to fight would make you complicit in the evil you witnessed." He paused, thinking of the 7 crew members who had died in the rescue. Their names were engraved on a memorial plaque aboard the Resolute, and he carried a copy of that plaque with him everywhere he went. "7 of my people gave their lives to save those children. They knew the risks. They went anyway, because some things are worth dying for, because some things are worth everything." He stepped back from the podium. "Don't call us heroes. Just remember what we stood for. And when you face your own impossible choices, when you encounter evil that seems too powerful to challenge, remember that ordinary people can do extraordinary things when they refuse to accept injustice." 1 year later, the Resolute departed on a new mission. The ship had been repaired and upgraded, its crew expanded with volunteers from a dozen species. Jake stood on the bridge once more, but this time he wasn't alone. Of the served as his tactical officer. A young named Teal, his grandniece, handled communications. Grandmother Moss had sent one of her best agents, a quiet called Whisper, to coordinate intelligence. They were joined by ships from every species in the coalition. A fleet of hope, some called it. Others called it the Liberation Fleet. Their purpose was simple: to seek out those who suffered under tyranny throughout the galaxy and to let them know that help existed. The evening before departure, Jake gathered his crew in the common area. It had become a tradition to read letters from the children they had rescued, messages of gratitude and hope from young people rebuilding their lives. Sophie wrote most frequently, updating them on her studies, her new family, her dreams for the future. Jake held her latest letter in his hands. He read it aloud, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "Dear Commander and the crew of the Resolute, I hope this letter finds you well. My new family had a party for my birthday last week. I turned 13. Mom made a cake, and my little brother tried to blow out the candles before I could. It was the happiest day I can remember since before everything happened." He smiled at that, imagining Sophie surrounded by laughter and love instead of fear and chains. "I've been studying hard at school. The other kids treat me normally, which is exactly what I wanted. Sometimes I have nightmares still, but they're getting less frequent. Dr. Park told me that's normal, that healing takes time. I believe her." The letter continued with small details of daily life, the ordinary moments that added up to something precious. Then it reached the end. "I think about you all every day. I think about the people who died to save us. I think about what you taught me about hope and courage and never giving up. Someday I'll join you out there in the stars. Someday I'll help save other children the way you saved us. Until then, I'll keep your words in my heart. Jake's voice caught as he read the final lines. You came for us. Now we'll come for others. That's what family does. Love always, Sophie. He set the letter down and looked at his crew. Human, and half a dozen other species, all united by a common purpose. They had proven that the galaxy could be better, that cruelty didn't have to be accepted, that hope could triumph over despair. You heard her, Jake said. Let's go make her proud. The Resolute turned toward the stars, followed by a fleet of allies, and vanished into the endless night. Behind them, Earth shone blue and bright, a home waiting for their return. Ahead of them, countless worlds waited to learn that they were not alone. The story of humanity in the galaxy had only just begun, and they would never stop fighting for those who couldn't fight for themselves.